We spend a lot of time trying to figure out who we are, where we fit in this bigger picture, where the world is taking us, where our life is taking us. And that's a game that never ends. I worked up in my own mind this idea that if anybody knew my own struggles, my challenges, I wouldn't be welcomed in the church. In 2016, I was diagnosed with shingles, and I was prescribed some prescription painkillers, and I quickly exhausted the prescription that was given. And I convinced myself that I was smart enough, that I was wise enough, that I could avoid the pitfalls of all of the addicts that had come before me. But in 2017, I ended up overdosing. I wish I could say that at that point I came clean to Aaron, and I wish I could say that that was the end of it, that God had sort of brought that to a close. But I would spend the next year and a half continuing to battle my addiction, continuing to live in this sort of double world. Nobody at that point thought, drugs was ever part of the picture. I received an outpouring of support and prayer requests, things like, hey, we're praying that the doctors are able to figure out what the problem is. And that just served to further amplify my own guilt and shame, because I knew what the problem was. I knew why I had ended up in the hospital that night. I had reached this point where my own conscience couldn't bear it anymore. I knew that I had crossed a line, that I was actively lying to people. I reached out to Tom and confessed to him that I had been doing this for the last 2 years. I'd been abusing these prescription drugs, and the first thing I did was talk to Aaron. And that was filled with tremendous fear. If I told Aaron everything that I was doing, all of the things that I had done, she would leave me immediately, and I would be all alone.
In 2017, when Ryan overdosed on painkillers, I did call 911 and emergency personnel came. An officer pulled me to the side and looked at me and gave me a reality of what was probably happening, and I couldn't believe him. There was no way. When it became clear how deep and twisted the addiction was, I couldn't really grasp that this was happening to us.
July of 2019 was the last day that I used. I reached this point where I felt like my only two choices were either to continue down this road and to effectively lose everything, or to attempt to truly be transparent, to reach out for the full degree of help. Sin is always going to be exposed. As much as we try to contain it, as much as we try to bury it, as much as we try to keep control over the situation, God is ultimately a God of justice, a God that hates sin, and a God that is going to expose that sin in the light of day.
The world is going to tell you what you're owed for your pain, but the Bible tells you what is already undeservedly given to you in spite of your sin. I wanted to forgive Ryan. I wanted our marriage back together. I wanted our family together. To extend forgiveness to Ryan made the acceptance of Christ's forgiveness for my life so much sweeter.
As we try to find our own solutions to our problems, we lose sight of the fact that it's not us that saves us. It's Jesus' death on the cross. I couldn't redeem myself. I couldn't bring myself back into reconciliation with God and with those around me. I remember talking to Jay Blackwell the day after I was caught for that final time, and I remember recounting to him this belief that I had finally hit rock bottom. And he said, there's always more bottoms to reach. At some point, we have to get off this train and find reconciliation and forgiveness in God. Restore is a program that we started last year, as we understand that everybody has a unique story in God's greater story for our lives. It's important to understand how that story fits into what God has ordained and what He's laid out. And so Restore is a 13-week program that starts out by walking through the fall and the consequences of that, and culminates ultimately in what God did for us on the cross, and how all of that fits into the different trials and the struggles that we face on a day-to-day basis. And your struggle may look different than mine, and your challenges may be different, but it's important to be able to talk openly and to be able to share those challenges with a like-minded group of believers.
How are you guys doing now?
We're doing really well. It's been amazing to see God's work in our lives individually and as a couple, as a family. It's exciting to see what God has done in this trial, but it's important to remember that life continues, and the challenges that we face and the struggles that we face are new and different each day. And it's important to be able to rely on God to provide biblical answers that are glorifying to Him. And we do that through finding connection and community, being vulnerable and accountable to one another, and living lives that are transparent and free.